Welcome to episode 12 of the Business Development Podcast. On today's episode, we are interviewing the CEO of ROC Advisors, Justin LaRocque, who is a seasoned entrepreneur, also a chartered accountant, and is going to provide you an absolute ton of financial advice for growing your business. Stay tuned.
The great Mark Cuban once said, "Business happens over years and years. Value is measured in the total upside of a business relationship, not by how much you squeezed out in any one deal." And we couldn't agree more. This is the Business Development Podcast, based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and broadcasting to the world. You'll get expert business development advice, tips and experiences, and you'll hear interviews with business owners, CEOs, and business development reps. You'll get actionable advice on how to grow business. Brought to you by Capital Business Development, capitalbd.ca. Let's do it. Welcome to the Business Development Podcast. And now your expert host, Kelly Kennedy.
Hello, welcome back to the Business Development Podcast. You are listening to episode 12, and on today's episode, we have the CEO of ROC Advisors with us, Justin LaRocque. Justin developed a passion for driving change and helping people and organizations reach their goals and objectives. His education and early career background is in finance with a chartered accountant designation from WC and several senior finance positions in both public and private companies with revenues ranging from 5 million all the way to 3 billion. He has led finance teams with over 250 million in cost transformation over 3 years, led a company that doubled its revenues in a 4-year period, started and sold a successful condo management company, and did financial reporting for a public company during a hostile takeover. He has recently founded ROC Advisors in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Justin, how are you today?
I'm good. I didn't realize it was such a mouthful, that piece there. I got to cut down and streamline.
Holy. Well, it's hard to be that successful, Justin. You gotta take it back a notch.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm doing great and excited to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, it's absolutely great to have you here. You know, I've been following you for a little bit. You know, you reached out to me, what was it, 2-3 weeks ago, kind of just made an introduction, let me know that you were kind of getting into the video space and that you'd actually reached out just asking me for some tips. And I was like, dude, I'm new. I'll help you with what I can help you with. But, you know, I'm learning too. We're both kind of on this journey together, but I'm kind of in our discussions. There's been a lot of great discussions. And I just want to say thank you so much for your early support of the podcast, Justin, and for reaching out and showing up as a guest. You know, at this point, you're my third guest, and I know that can always be a little bit of a risk. And I appreciate you trusting me today to do my best on here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, and I mean, I reached out, and I think the biggest thing I've learned is you learn by doing, right? So even if you only are a week or two ahead of me, you've already learned what, you know, things I haven't learned. So that's why I reached out. And yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So can you tell me a little bit about ROC Advisors? I think this one's kind of cool. I'm really happy to have you here today because, you know, as a business owner, we know what we know. We know that we need money. We know our best. We think we understand how to manage the money, but then things will come up. And one of the videos that you talk about a lot, and frankly, I watched your poll on LinkedIn and frankly got it was 80-1 people wanted to learn about working capital, right?
Absolutely. That's the lifeblood.
Yeah, right. Because most of us business owners, oh, we don't want to know. We don't necessarily want to know the balance sheet. We don't necessarily, you know, we understand that we need a profit loss and we need to be making profit most of the time, right? But when it comes down to working capital, you know, I mean, I even tell my clients, this is a risk. This is a risk of business development service. And I let my clients know that there's a potential that we could be so successful that we kill you. That's truly a risk of good business development if they're not being smart with their money, and specifically not being smart with working capital, because it doesn't take long to win this really great contract when suddenly you're over your head and your expenses for employee costs and who knows, just the cost of product go through the roof. And next thing you know, your money's not coming in for, like you said, 90, 120 days in some cases with oil and gas in Alberta. And yeah, we're in trouble real quick. So I would love to just maybe take a minute and chat with you about working capital.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the thing about working capital, particularly in Western Canada and specifically in Alberta, you know, a lot of companies work with the large businesses in the oil and gas sector or a trickle down company that works for them. And the big thing that you find is a company will work for them, they'll have early success, and inevitably that oil and gas company will say, hey, I know you're a $2 million business. Would you like to be a $10 million business? I've got these 3 contracts and you've really crushed it. And so they'll reach out, kind of say, hey, here's the 3 projects. Do you want to do them? And there's not a business owner that I've met yet that can say, well, I don't think I want that work. So inevitably, and this is the exciting part of entrepreneurship, right? You live for this moment where you've done such a great job that your customer comes to you and says, hey, I want you to do more for me. So now what happens though is inevitably that business, they were used to a $2 million business where when they had a receivable that maybe came in a little bit later, it wasn't the end of the world. But now, when you take that and you have a large project, the working capital really needs to be considered, because previously, you might have had to float 100K or 200K of payroll while that cash came in from that big project. But now, if that's a $2 million payroll, that's where you really start to get into issues. So that's what we've really seen a lot of.
Yeah, for sure. You know what? Yeah, I've seen this plenty of times, man. Like I was in service-based industry for a long time. You know that. Me and you have kind of had that conversation. My background is very much in, we used to sell, quality inspectors. In this case with Solace, I work with Solace and we do safety personnel. And payment is always a challenge, like it would just be great if companies would pay on time, but that just is not, it's never really the case. And I think one of the questions that I had for you today, which I think would be incredibly valuable for my listeners, is what do you do when you have payment terms with a client and say, like, you got net 60 days or net 90 days or whatever, but they're pushing you out to like 120 or 150 or God knows how long. And, like you said, you're a smaller company, you're running on tight cash flow, and you're hoping that your receivables are going to come in and suddenly you're in trouble. Do you have any advice for those companies? What should they be doing?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 things that I would definitely recommend, and they come at 3 stages of the journey. So the first one is, if you have far enough line of sight on that, is really looking to engage your bank and say, hey, I have this project. I am looking for some bulge or bridge loans, which basically is a short-term loan intended to be that 90, 180 days. And you've got to be very specific in that application though, right? Because the bank's going to want to say, okay, I'm not just giving this to you for any old reason. You got to be able to say, well, here's project A, here's the payroll that I expect to go out the door, here's maybe the inventory I got to purchase for it. And this is when my payment terms are. And so here's when I'm expecting to close it off. So that's probably the most prudent methodology to do, is to be able to look a little bit further out. Now, as we know in business, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So a secondary option that you do have, and this one you do have to check with the customer a little bit, or at least feel the discussion, is to factor that invoice. So that is a service where you can basically, as soon as that invoice is produced, you can engage a company that will basically take the invoice, front you the cash on that invoice, and then in turn, when the cash is actually received, they'll take a cut of it, and that's how the transaction essentially works. Now, the nuance there that you got to be careful with is, with a factoring company, some companies don't want you to do that. It's seen as a little bit less credible. I think it's becoming a little bit more accepted in the world, but that definitely is something to look at. And then the third one, and I actually didn't talk about this in the videos that you referenced there, Kelly, but one of the big things that I would tell people is, specifically for large clients and specifically in the oil and gas sector. So I'm getting, a little bit targeted in this comment, but the big companies, they have such large accounts receivable and payable teams that they are actually pretty good about paying on their payment terms. The nuance, though, is you got to make sure that that invoice is 100% correct
Mm-hmm.
and that it's been received. Because I can't tell you the number of times that I went and revisited an invoice and said, well, how did I get to 80 days? Like, their payment terms are 45. And
Yeah.
inevitably, when you go and look, you're like, oh, geez, like I sent the invoice in late. Or the big one that these guys will do is, if you got a 45-day payment, they'll wait till day 40. They'll say, oh, hey, the address is wrong, you're going to have to resubmit, and now we're at day 90. So those would be the 3 things, is really looking at those bridge loans. There is the ability to kind of factor if you do need to, and then also just making sure that when you do actually get ready to send that invoice, it's 100% correct and submitted timely.
Yeah, no, thanks, Justin. That's really helpful, because I know, I mean, heck, I know I have current clients that have struggled with payment terms, and where they have locked in payment terms, but you know how it is, man. Alberta oil and gas. That, unfortunately, if you're working for some big players, Yeah, you're right. Sometimes they're good, but some are not. And sometimes you're getting paid when you're getting paid. And I know that that can be a really scary place for a lot of businesses. And they didn't expect to get there because they thought, well, shit, I have the payment terms. Why can't I get paid on time? And it just doesn't always work out that way. So it's good to know that there are other options. I definitely like that you touched on factoring. I know that's starting to become a lot more popular. It wasn't for a long time, but it's definitely becoming more popular over time. But I like also that you touched on the fact that it can be a risk. I wasn't aware that you had to declare that you were doing it. Is that just a business best practice?
So, what would happen technically in that process? And there are some nuances to this, but in the standard process, you would actually assign the receivable to the factoring company.
Okay.
And so your customer would typically have that disclosed to them.
I see. I see. Okay. Yeah, I'd never done it, so I wasn't aware of how it worked, but that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the other factor that you're going to have to consider there, and again, we're getting into kind of some of the detail, but that's, hopefully what the listeners get value out of, is when you do that, you would also have to notify any of your financing arms, right?
Okay.
Because they would be able to claim the receivable. And so typically when you sign up for your loans, you're signing a general security agreement, which includes the receivable. So that is another nuance, is that you do have to involve the banks. And so I guess probably the biggest thing, as a quick tip for everybody, is it's not like you would just turn that arrangement on in one day. It's definitely going to take you, 15, 30, 45 days to get that sort of arrangement in place.
Okay. Okay. So just to reiterate kind of on what Justin was saying, I mean, if you are going to utilize factoring to cover your receivables, remember it's not an instant fix. Okay. So, I mean, you need to be planning for this ahead of time. And it's, that's kind of crappy just from the fact that I think a lot of companies, by the time they realize that they might need some factoring, they're already incredibly late on that payment term, right?
Yeah.
So, lesson, word for the wise. Justin has kind of provided you guys a real valuable piece of information here. If you have any concern or you think that you might have a company that may be paying slow, or you've heard maybe in the industry that potentially they don't always pay their bills on time, and you know that your receivables is going to be a big deal, like cash flow, keeping up to date is going to be a big issue, get ahead of it, guys. Get ahead of it. Find some other options. Whether, Justin, you talk about getting shareholder loans, you talk about potentially liquidating some of your old inventory to try to generate revenue. But if you can get ahead of this, it's going to save you some real headaches, especially if suddenly you find yourself 90 days without payment and you're starting to get yourself in some trouble. One of the other things, Justin, that you talked about, which I also think is very important, and we started implementing because, I mean, as you know, you've been in operations, you've been a CEO. I've also been an operations and business development manager for many, many years. And in that case, I was also involved in signing plenty of the large contracts for companies and kind of reviewing payment terms and doing stuff like that. So you talked about rejecting offers. And I know for a lot of companies, or, they're looking at this and they just got this great offer from gigantic oil and gas company, gigantic manufacturing company, but the payment terms are garbage. They're like net 90 days. And you don't necessarily think about it at the time, but guys, 90 days is a really, really long time to wait to get paid. And that's assuming you're getting paid on time. Can you talk
Yeah.
about when you might want to reject a job, Justin?
Yeah, so I'll probably interlace two ideas here. So the first one is, when I go into the businesses that I do, the very first tool that I will prepare for them is a cash flow management tool. And it's a very simple tool that I'd encourage every owner to do. And what I want you to do is you take a piece of paper, or ideally Excel if you're handy with it, and you go week by week and just look out 30 days or 45 days. Okay, so you look out 4 to 6 weeks. And every week I want you to write in, here's when I roughly should get paid based on the revenue that I had in the terms. So here's the money that should come in my door. And here's the money that has to go out the door. So whether it's payroll or paying a loan or a lease. And I think that's a really important tool. I do it for longer out with a little bit more advanced methodology here in Excel, but any business owner can do that. And I think it's so critical. And that's really going to set you up so you don't have to factor, you don't have to talk to your banks. And the reason I bring that up is it ties back to this question, Kelly, about talking with these customers that have net 90 terms, is when you do have that model, that's going to allow you to see, hey, do I have the cash to support this client who's not going to pay me for 90 days? Because a big flag is the longer some of these payment terms are, is a general construct, the more financially unstable that company may be. That's just a general correlation you have to think about. If you have a net 30 payer, they're probably pretty stable. If you have a
Mm-hmm.
net 90 payer, you might want to be paying attention to what that company is doing.
Y-
And
y-
so one of the things, and sorry, I'll just finish the thought there, Kelly. One of the things is when you go into your seasons, particularly if you're a seasonal business where you might only be working for 3 or 4 months really intensely, you can't afford to have that client that's not going to pay you to the end of the season because you just won't have the cash. And by the time you go to factor or bring out that loan or discount your receivables, you'll find you gave away most of the margin on that job.
oh man. Yeah, that's that sucks for a lot of people. I really hate to say that because I mean we're dealing with a lot of companies, especially here in Alberta, especially after 2015. Like I was in the middle of that mess too, and where what I mean, companies kept hitting people up to increase those payment terms, and people's payment terms went from like net 30 to net 90 overnight. And a lot of these companies ended up in a lot of trouble. And I'll tell you, Justin, they're not here anymore. A lot of them aren't here anymore. I watched Nisku. I don't know, I mean, for most of our listeners are in Canada, but if you're not familiar, Nisku is like the manufacturing hub for Edmonton. We have Edmonton, which is like big downtown city center. And then when you just leave town, there's another kind of city next door called Leduc. And inside of Leduc, there's kind of a little sub area called Nisku. And that's where all the fabrication facilities, manufacturing centers, really industry, that's where industry was. And in 2015, when Canada kind of had a big economic downturn, especially in Alberta really got hammered. And that place went from like full occupancy, gigantic manufacturing centers to like, I kid you not, in about 25, 30 days, it was a ghost town. There was like half of the business or more was decimated or closed shops. It was brutal. And yeah, just I remember that time well, Justin. And I know for a fact that I was seeing what was happening. And what was happening was people's payment terms were getting just like destroyed. And in the case of those big manufacturing centers, we're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars not coming in on time. And it killed a lot of jobs. And it can definitely be decimating if your payment terms start to get messed up.
Yeah, it's something that, again, like that's where you really want to be talking with your customers because, again, if they have a blanket policy where they're just changing the terms, and back in 15, that was just the name of the game with the price of oil,
Mm.
there's not much you can do about it. But having said that, I mean, the old adage is true: squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I would encourage you, again, just as best working capital process, as soon as you're getting close to your payment terms, make sure you reach out to that customer because the number of times that you'll reach out to that customer and they'll say, "Oh, I was just sending a check out the door. I'll make sure yours is in there," right? It is invaluable. So
Yes, yes. I mean, it's so funny. I was working in 15. I was working for a company who same thing. We had been waiting on this gigantic check. Like for the company, it was huge. I mean, in the real world, it wasn't too much. I think it was about $500,000, but it was a lot for the size of the company that I was working at the time. And we were waiting and waiting and waiting on this check. And I remember we got the call saying like, "Hey, it's ready. We'll put it in the mail." And I remember my boss at the time just looking at me and saying, "Kelly, nope, you're driving to Calgary and we are getting that check." So I hopped in a vehicle. I was in Calgary that afternoon. I came back with $500,000 check from Calgary. But it was so tight. Everybody was terrified. Nobody knew quite what to do or what was going to happen. And I remember that being a pretty triumphant day.
awesome.
So Justin, you have ROC Advisors. It's a relatively new company. You incorporated in January of this year, I believe, 2023. Tell me, what do you want to do with ROC? What are the services that you guys provide? You're based in Edmonton, Alberta company. You are a Métis certified business. Congratulations. I saw that you got your certification. Was it just
Yeah,
yesterday?
it was just yesterday.
Oh, well,
Yes.
congratulations. That's awesome, Justin. And yeah,
Yeah.
I want to know more about it. I want to know more about customized finance teams. I want to know more about kind of what your approach is to finance and how you might be able to help some of these businesses.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's actually been what do we got here? Just under a month that I've been unincorporated, actually. So it's been a little bit of a wild ride, and basically, so my background is actually as a chartered accountant. So I got that at PwC, and then over the last 5 years, I kind of left that as I was helping the family business work towards an exit of the business, and kind of shifted into operational roles of COO and CEO. But having said that, when COVID came around, it really, a lot of the individuals that were thinking about retiring, it really pushed them more towards that decision. And in the CPA world, that really became a factor. And so when we look at it, a lot of the senior professionals that have that high-end financial advice for businesses are leaving the industry. And then conversely, about 10 years ago, we merged in our designations. So there used to be the CA, the CGA, and the CMA, and that's been consolidated now to the CPA. And one of the ramifications there is just kind of the training and the recruitment. And this is also a generational thing as well, but there's just less people getting it. And so when you look at that and you say, okay, so supply is dwindling and demand is staying the same, if not increasing, what's going to happen in that market? And inevitably, the price is going to go up. And so there's two ways of dealing with that. One is you say, okay, well, the price is going to go up and it's going to cost me more to get good financial advice in this world. The other thing that I'm looking at, and this is really where ROC Advisor comes in, is utilizing a customized finance team. So what we do is we take on that traditional controller role that companies are hiring, and we say instead of one individual that can kind of do a little bit of everything, what we're going to do is deploy a team of fractional CFOs, controllers, and junior accountants that are going to allocate time to the file. It'll be about the same cost as that one individual, but you're going to have much more specific knowledge. And this is really grounded in what I believe is Edmonton and is Alberta, and that is that small medium business. So what you traditionally see is, somebody has some success, they're good at what they do, they start a business, their partner helps them do the books, and then they say, hey, this is getting pretty complex, we better bring somebody in here. And so they go from having almost no cost allocated to accounting, and now they go out and hire, and they got to spend 80 or 100 grand on this controller.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth of that is, though, that role really is still probably 70%, 80% manageable by that kind of junior level individual. What you're going to benefit from, though, is that kind of 10 or 20% of the high end CPA knowledge. And so that's really, I saw a need where I do think it's going to be harder to get CPAs. We're already seeing that. If you go on Indeed right now and you look at controller roles, 10 years ago when I got my designation, if you get left and got your first role and you made 80, 90 grand, you're like, hey, I'm feeling pretty good about life. Right now, as the market's getting more compressed, you're already seeing that number drift up to 100, 110. And I think it's going to get worse. And so as a small, medium-sized business, it's really hard, if not possible, to kind of spend that kind of money just on the finance side, which really is just a support arm for your business. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's really where we're looking to play, is being able to say to business, you don't need a full-time resource. You do need that high-end knowledge, though, to make a couple critical decisions. So we'll give you some junior staffing that allow you to process the books, and then we'll come in from time to time and give you that high level advice.
That's a really, really great idea, Justin. I just want to congratulate you kind of ahead of time. That's incredibly smart and forward thinking. And I think you're really on to something there. I mean, with capital, I kind of did something relatively similar because what I recognized is that typically a business does not need a business development rep for 5 days a week. If you do your work and you do heavy work, you can essentially get 5 days a week done in 2 or 3 days a week. And that's kind of the model that I've taken with capital, and we're able to crush it out, and we're still pumping. Typically in a contract, we're still pumping out between 35, 40 meetings in a 6-month term, and we're doing it on half the time just with a much better plan. And I think that's kind of what you're doing as well, and it's incredibly smart and forward thinking. And I do think that that's the way of the world moving forward. I think we're kind of getting away from the idea that you need somebody all the time. There's other options available. So great job.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you, and we've had early success. We've been around for less than a month, like I said here, or just over. We've already brought on 2 full-time clients, and so yeah, we're seeing the need on the client side, and then you allude to a little bit there, but on the employee side, it's also really exciting, right? I've had numerous individuals reach out to me and say, hey, maybe I'm a stay-at-home parent, or maybe I'm just looking for a side hustle to get engaged.
Yep.
And so when they have the ability to come into this ecosystem and grab 10, 20 hours, but where they're really helping a small business or medium-sized business make critical decisions, that's really rewarding work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And same thing with capital. We utilize a hybrid work program as well. And, I mean, I wouldn't want it any other way. The reality is we need to be more accommodating to our employees and to our lives. And if there's one good thing that came out of COVID, it was a realization that people are capable, willing, and if you just give them the room to do it, they can do some really great work from home. So we're utilizing a really similar model with capital. I do like to spend at least one day a week at the client office. I do think it's good just for you need to be able to kind of understand how it works for them there. But I don't think most companies, especially service companies like me and you, need to be there all the time. And utilizing that model has worked incredibly well for me and Capital over time. Wanted to just, I mean, it's so funny because, you just talked about, you literally just launched, you already have 2 clients, like you're rocking it. I know I have a lot of entrepreneurs listening right now who are incredibly envious of you, Justin. Because
Sometimes you're lucky. Yeah.
most of us are not that successful right off the bat. But yeah, that's awesome, man. Good for you. I was literally going to say the next question that I had for you was, what are some of the challenges that you face getting your business off the ground? But I'll let you talk to it. Have you had many challenges, or is it just working out for you?
Well, I don't want to jinx it. So far, so good. But no, I mean, there's definitely challenges, right? I think, for me, probably the two things that I would look at is one, kind of that family work balance, right? I mean,
Yes.
when you go on the entrepreneurial journey, now this is your baby, so it's 8 o'clock at night. When you have a traditional job, maybe you're pretty comfortable. You kind of say, I can turn my brain off and I'm going to
Yep.
focus on the family. Once you start the business, it's like your other child, right? And
Absolutely.
and so I think that's the big thing that I'm really looking at is, how do you create those boundaries early and often? So that's
Hmm.
something I did with my wife, is kind of said, hey, before we do this journey, let's kind of etch out some boundaries of what can I do, what can I not do, when do you want me fully engaged with the family. And so I think that's probably one of the big challenges that most entrepreneurs would run into is how do you strike that balance. And then I think the other one, and I'm grateful that I have this problem after 1 month of operation, but just like everybody else in the market, is you can't find people.
Yeah.
We actually posted a director role here to help me out, and yeah, it's just there's not people out there that are looking to move, where they want significant capital to do so. And so as a result, actually, I'm likely to pivot to that kind of hybrid model I talked about, where I'm using more of a fractional workforce right away. I was thinking I'd have to do the full time to kind of start to scale the business and then introduce that ecosystem.
Hmm.
But I think just the way of the world right now is, I'm not seeing the talent right there. So I'd say those are the two biggest challenges I have is A, making sure that we have that balance, and then B, hiring.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know, like, for instance, like I also was in the middle of like a small hiring phase there a little bit ago, and hired a young man named Cole. And so sounds super funny. Obviously in this day, you put out an ad, you get an absolute ton of resumes. And Cole, if you're listening to this, congratulations. You were the only person who literally went out of his way. He's actually from the next town from where I live. And he literally called. He's like, hey, I'm just out. I'm a new marketing grad. I just graduated and I just wanted to drop my resume by your house. You know what? I can't think of a better way to market for a business development job, is to show me that you are willing to come to me and make that connection. So congratulations, Cole. That's why you got hired. You're a rock star, and really looking forward to the next steps with you.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It
And it is the small touches, right?
it
So
really
actually,
is.
when I won the first client, what I actually did is I found the posting on Indeed, and instead of going through Indeed, I actually found their personal email and reached out to them directly and said, hey, I saw this. I think this is a different way of doing the business. And we met for a beer, and a week later they were a client. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And just speaking to that, I talk about it all the time on my podcast that there's no replacement for in-person meetings. There's no replacement for personability. You know what I mean? We live in a time where people either don't want to meet, or they want to try and find a way around that, or what I mean, in the best case, people want to have a Zoom meeting, and what I mean, they're great, but nothing is a replacement for going and sitting in front of somebody and seeing who they are as a person while you enjoy a beer together, you enjoy, a face-to-face interaction. Nothing. There's zero replacement for it. What is your kind of take on that, Justin?
yeah, no, I 100% agree. So we actually, the two clients that I have, the one I go into their office, and the one is a fully remote customer. And so, but they do a really good job of this, is they make sure that at least once a week we're meeting for that coffee or meeting for that lunch to get that face to face. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I do think that, you know, COVID, we were all on virtual, and it just really emphasized that, hey, we're still humans, right? We need to have that physical touch and presence. So yeah,
Yes.
I 100% advocate that whenever I can. I think the one thing that virtual's done a great job of is almost setting a filter for the meeting, right? Like there was nothing worse than you're like, hey, we should meet for a coffee. You get together for a coffee, and you're done the conversation in 10 minutes. You're like, okay, why did we do this?
Yeah,
So I do think it's gotten really good at kind of setting the table for those in-person meetings.
sure.
But yeah, you can never get away from those.
Yeah, and especially with your customers. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, I was never looking to make customers. I was always looking to make friends. And if you go into your meeting, if you go back to like, I'm sure with you, with your safety background, that you made an absolute ton of friends in the safety director backgrounds, that sort of thing, because you've been to tons of meetings with them. I'm sure that you have some that still call you today. And that's my background with the quality side, is that like I've made so many friends in a decade of quality sales, marketing, and account management, that like even though I'm not in that quality space anymore, I still talk with these people on a regular basis. I have them on my Facebook, I have them on my LinkedIn. They call me for advice. Some of them are actually moving into their own marketing and sales roles because they're starting their own companies. And it's so funny how if you do a good job at creating great relationships with your clients, how far that'll follow you and how far that'll carry you in your career, even outside of that industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just so powerful relationships. So as an example, the second client that we were able to get, how that happened is it was a Sunday night, and my coach and a good friend of mine says, hey, I saw this posting. I know this guy really well. Do you want an introduction? And I was like, yeah, like thanks for thinking about me. And so it connects me with that individual, and 2 days later they're a client. And
Yeah.
there's no way that happens without having built that relationship. So I'll throw a special shout out to Mike Mack at X5 Management. He was the guy that connected me. So he's a really good guy.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Same thing. Same things happened to me, especially when I was getting capital off the ground. I had, like in that case, my old boss had kind of recommended me to a company, and same thing. Like in no time flat, we were a client, and heck yeah, if I look at all of my current main client relationships, they all came from a referral of some type. They all came from a past relationship or someone that I knew real closely and just kind of dropped a line and helped you out. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of a referral, guys. It's huge. It's in some cases it can be everything.
Yeah, well, and I think on that, and I don't want to take us all the way into the segue there, but when you look at it, like for any business to be successful, its offering has to be competitive, or very quickly it won't have clients, and it'll go away. And so, I think as a general construct, when you look into an industry, most of the businesses have somewhat of a similar offering. And so, if you're at that point, that's where I think the relationship is so critical, right? Because people want to do business with people they like, and so if you're able to have a price point and an offering that's close to the competitor, really the relationship is what differentiates it.
No, for sure, for sure. So Justin, can you tell me a little bit about what motivated you to start Rock? Like obviously your background has kind of been in accounting and management, but you've done a lot of different things. What kind of motivated you? What was the catalyst that you decided that, you know what, today's the day I'm going to take that leap? Because I have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to the show, Justin. And they might have a really great idea, or they might have this really great technical background, but they haven't took that leap yet and they're on the fence. What kind of advice can you give to those people? I know it's like when we've already done it, it's sometimes it can be hard to look back and remember what that was like in that moment, but we all need
Yeah,
that kick in the ass, Justin. What's the
yeah,
kick in the ass? What got you going?
yeah. I think I look at it. I believe it's Jeff Bezos that kind of introduced this methodology or made it popular at least. But I'm a big fan of thinking about, when I'm 80 years old, when I'm 90 years old, and I look back on life, what are those big regrets and how do I minimize them? And I think I'm in a little bit of a unique situation, maybe because I am a CPA. And so it is somewhat of an easier to find job, in that, like, I know the title of the job I would go after. I know the qualifications. I know I likely have them. And so if ROC Advisors crashed and burned tomorrow, I would still be clear on the job I need to get. Having
Hmm.
said that, if you're in a trade, or again, even if you're in a sales role, like, I think most people know where they would go if it didn't work. And so for me, how I looked at it is, I said, if I don't try to start a company and actually be able to say when I'm 80 that, hey, it worked really well, or it didn't, I just wouldn't be happy with myself. I
Hmm.
always knew I wanted to do it. I think the big thing for me was the timing and making sure that I had the timing right. And I feel like I do. But that's what I'd say is, when you look at that risk, if you're having to put a ton of capital to start that business up, then I think that's something that you got to look at and consider the risk mitigation and, how could I get out of this investment if it doesn't go well?
Hmm.
But particularly if you're offering a service business or something with that low upfront capital, I would strongly encourage people to do it. I think the way of the world right now is we are moving more to this kind of gig economy, freelance economy. And so I think for me, what prompted me to do it is it's easy to sit on the sidelines and say, well, this is what I would have done. And so I always said to myself, well, one day I got to get out there and just say, yeah, this is 100% me. And if it doesn't work, that's on me. And if it does, great. And then I get to build my team and it's going to be great. So I think that's what really kind of prompted me to do it is assessing the risk and saying, it's relatively minimal at this point, or as minimal as it's going to get, right? It's never going to be
Yeah,
zero.
that's
Um,
right.
but
Yeah.
and then just kind of going out there and doing it, right? And I think the other thing that maybe holds people back or is probably the biggest thing on my radar was, and this goes back to the fears and challenges we talked about, is kind of that fear of rejection, right? That
Hmm.
fear that, oh, hey, I finally do it. And then, nobody shows up, right?
Yeah.
I ask people to help me out and they don't. And I think, there's nothing you can do about that. That's like jumping out of a plane or going down a scary ride.
Yeah.
You just got to say, okay, well, I'm doing it and I'm going to fully commit. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So
No, you totally nailed it too. You literally in my last episode, I was talking about confidence. I just took a minute and I talked about confidence because you have to have the confidence to ask for business. You have to have the confidence to ask for an RFP or an RFQ and in some cases you have to have the confidence to take that leap to start your business because you know what? I think you'll find that in your head it's a lot worse than the reality. The things that you cook up in your mind about what could happen are typically considerably worse than what could really happen to you. What I've found what I've found personally in starting both capital business development and in starting this podcast is both exceeded my expectations. Both, I mean, in my mind, I thought were going to be hard to get off the ground. I thought was going to be an incredible challenge, and I don't know if I'm up for it. It's like I have a lot of confidence in myself. I always have, but it's like when you're going to take that jump, I remember it being incredibly scary for me, thinking like, oh crap, like is anyone even going to listen to this? Like, does anyone even care? And heck, like it's been overwhelming on both. People love capital, people love the business development podcast. And yeah, in my mind, I was like, oh, no one's gonna like this, no one's gonna need this service. And I was completely that was just my negative side. That was just my fear side trying to hold me back. And what I found is that if you acknowledge it, you say, yeah, I hear you, but we're gonna do this anyway, I think you're gonna be pleasantly surprised. And you're like Justin said, you're not getting any younger. Okay. So regardless of whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe early 50s, whatever, there's no better time to do it than right now because frankly, you're in the best part of your life to do it. The sooner that you can start your business, the sooner that you can take that risk, and even if you crash and burn, recover from that risk, the better.
I think another thing that people maybe discount when they think about doing it is there's a ton of experience that you get, even if it's not successful, and in this world where you're always looking to differentiate yourself, even being able to say that, hey, I tried a business, I ran it for 3 months or 6 months and it didn't work. Like those are critical experiences that for employers, they look at, I wouldn't run out of my way to say it was an absolute failure, but but I mean, those are critical experiences that a lot of small and medium sized businesses say, hey, like this person, they did take on the risk. They did try to do it. Maybe it didn't work for whatever reason, but those are key attributes for hiring as well, right? So almost, I would even encourage people, and again, this is another framing I put to mind, is hey, if this doesn't work in 6 months, this is something I can talk about with a future employer. You
Mhm.
can almost look at it as a job, right? It's a little bit of a cold way of looking at it, but again, I'm an accountant, so that's what we do is kind of really crunch the numbers and talk about it from a quantitative, qualitative. So that's another thing I think people might discount is even just taking the leap is going to give you an experience that employers would find attractive, even in your absolute downside of failure.
Yeah, no, I'd agree because it shows self-startership, it shows confidence, it shows the ability to think on your feet and think critically. No question. It's a great thing to have on your resume. However, what I mean, I would also say, Justin, that most entrepreneurs that I've met, I haven't met, frankly, maybe I'm just lucky or just, I don't know, an anomaly. But most of the business owners that I've talked to have been successful. Like I feel like it's almost like the universe converges to help them, because it's like if you're willing to take that leap, put yourself out there, you probably already have a skill set that you know how to use. You probably thought it through. You have experience, and if you go out and you do that well, which most business owners do because they're very committed to their company and their own success, they typically do what they do quite well. It can almost be hard to fail, if that makes sense. If you're coming across it correctly, you're coming at it from the right place, it's your passion, you really love doing that work. Like in my case, capital is my passion. I love business development. I literally still do the work. Like I enjoy going to work and doing business development every day, even though it's like it's my company and I operate an employee and I'm doing this podcast. I still enjoy doing the business development side of it, which has always made me very effective. But I feel like if you are willing to do that, take that leap, you're probably going to be good at it. I think you have higher chance of succeeding than failing.
Yeah, well, and I agree. And I think what that is, I mean, again, there's a million books that do a better job than you and I will of explaining it.
Sure.
But like Jim Collins talks about the flywheel effect, right? And what he in his book Good to Great, and really he's talking about like pick what you're really good at and start turning the wheel, right? Now, when you first start a business, you might not know what you're really good at, right? You have an idea and you put it out to the world, but that flywheel effect where like the first turn around the wheel is the hardest and then it gets easier and easier, I think
Mhm.
that really comes into play with what you said there, which is kind of once you put that intent out into the world and say, hey, I'm doing this, like I am committing, that's when you do have that like magical moments where you're like, oh wow, and now people are helping me and this opportunity came that I never thought would. And but the thing is, you have to commit and you have to vocalize it and put it out to the world so that the world can help you, right? Because nobody can help you if you don't ask or put it out to them, right? And so I think that's like a really big part of the commitment is if you're sitting there and you're 50-50 on the decision and you're not committing it, nobody's going to be able to help you because they don't know what you need, right? And I put that on somebody's LinkedIn post there, which is when you commit, that's when people can help you and give feedback. And if you don't, you're never going to get there. So even just pushing yourself to the 51% of I'm going to do this is like monumental versus 50-50. Because at 50-50, you gain no momentum. At
Huge.
51, at least you do.
Yeah, yeah. At some point, you got to take yourself off the fence.
Yeah, 100%.
So, Justin, obviously ROC Advisors is relatively new, but I mean, this isn't your first rodeo. You've founded multiple businesses now. If you could go back to kind of the beginning and just give yourself one piece of advice that you know now that you didn't know at the beginning of those times, what would it be?
If I could go back to the beginning, yeah. So the first business that I founded was with a couple other guys, and we founded a condo management company. It's actually still existing. It's doing great, Converge Condo Management. And I think the thing that I would say at the time, and one of my really good friends, Mark Donnelly, he talked about this because he was one of the partners. He said, "Hey, we just have to be patient." And I think, Mark's a couple years older than I and smarter than I am. so,
Yeah.
so he said, hey, when we grow this business, the work will come if we do a good job at it, and I think I'm finding that on this business as well. If you do a good job, the work will come, but you got to do a good job. And so that's something that when we started the first business, I think I was really eager to run out and grab every opportunity that we could and just, start shooting towards the moon. And Mark had a lot of foresight where he said, "Hey, look, let's invest in the process. Let's invest in our strategy. Let's be really clear on what a good client and a bad client is, and then this thing's going to take off and scale." And I think that's something that I've really used intentionally when I go here, which is, hey, we've grabbed 2 clients and we're still looking for more, but at the same time, I'm like, how do I take a breath now? How do I make
Yeah.
sure that I hire the employees, make sure we have good communication, make sure we have standard processes? And I think that's something that, I would tell that to myself from when we started the first business. And now I'm trying to utilize it as I start the second one.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to talk to that for a minute because I understand that like me and you are both utilizing essentially hybrid work models with our business, and we both operate them. So I mean, you're providing the actual service as well as I am. You know what? Like maybe you're kind of just starting this journey, but I'm definitely finding one of the challenges with this model is definitely in being able to train your employees as well as you would like to and give them the amount of time that you would like to give them. And the way that I'm kind of doing it with Cole is ultimately we're doing as much job shadowing as we can. We're doing kind of work over Zoom. We're sharing our information and kind of communicating as best as we can. But there's definitely some challenges in trying to train in our situation. Have you thought much about that?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it actually because we're at a spot in our model where I've posted for more of a higher end individual,
Mm.
but naturally we are going to need more junior accountants. And so I have thought about the merits of, with a higher end individual, they come with a certain skill set, but they also have their own methodologies.
Yeah.
Whereas with more junior, you have a chance to kind of sculpt and mold and really kind of make them more of, hey, this is how I think.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to both, right? You do want diversity of thought. You don't want groupthink everywhere. But yes, I've definitely thought about it. I think the big thing that we'll be looking to utilize, and I'm already starting to carve this out, is every time you have that discussion with a client or that you run into an operational issue, I'm jotting it down and I'm looking to build a process around it so that when I do go to train, I'm not using anecdotal information, kind of saying like, well, I think in this one time I did this, and the other time I did that, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you figure
Sure.
it out, and let me know how
Yeah.
it goes. So I think that would be something that we're going to really look to utilize is making sure that as I bump into them, I'm jotting it down and I'm saying, okay, look, this is how you do this. So like as an example already, with the first two clients, I realized, hey, the first three discussions I had with them were A, B, C. And
Hmm.
so I'm starting to build that out so that when I do onboard the first employee that we hire, I can be like, hey, so when we go into the customer, that here's A, here's B, here's C, right? And so I think that's what we're really looking to do is how do you make it replicable via process? So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually doing the exact same thing. So as I'm figuring it out and figuring out the best ways to go about doing this, I'm also putting together the process and how to do it because I do have a certain way of work that I want it done because the way that I've done it has kind of worked incredibly well for capital. It's a really great business model that we utilize for growing business and it is replicatable very easily if you follow a process. So I do like the fact that I can kind of work with him and train him on my process, but he also brings a lot of outside experience as well to help our business with things that I'm missing, my blind spots, right? But we're kind of charting new ground here. We really are because I don't think before in history we've had to try to train people from home. It's a completely different model than our parents went with, right? So we are charting new ground is a way that I like to say it. And there's definitely going to be trial and error, but I think we'll figure it out.
yeah. Well, and I think, one of the things that I've noticed in the virtual setting is your focus is typically good because you're engaging in a super direct manner virtually. You're looking at each other like very directly, and you're very conscious of it. But I think it's also a little bit more draining, right? I think people saw this
For
again
sure.
through the pandemic. Is being on a screen for 8 hours is pretty trying, and so I think probably the difference for me at least is when I would do in-person training, you'd have like an 8 hour training day and you'd go to the coffee machine together and you'd have lunch together and so on and
Yeah.
so forth and kind of have more of a slow drip on the training itself. Whereas I think in the virtual setting, it's a little bit more digestible to say, hey, for the next 30 minutes, we're gonna really be training, like really getting some good information, kind of feed you with the fire hose. And then we're going to take a half hour off or an hour off and like reset our brains, kind of step away from the computer. Let's go out and actually meet in person and lunch if possible, right? So I
Absolutely.
think that's the big thing I've noticed with the training is in person you can kind of have more of that slow drip methodology and just kind of have soak time. Whereas I think when it's virtual, that's actually much more draining than it's worth. And you really got to be prescriptive in getting the information across.
Yeah, like especially when you're trying to grow your business and you're doing your marketing and sales and stuff and your own business development, the ability to just kind of take a bit of a break from everything. Like I highly encourage people to just get out and just take a half hour, go for a walk, get some fresh air, have a coffee, just have a moment to yourself to get yourself back into a proper headspace before you start making calls and stuff again. Because yeah, it can be incredibly challenging. And I definitely encourage that with my employees that if you're hitting a point where, you're starting to feel the stress, you're starting to feel overwhelmed, that's a great time to just take a minute. And, I'm never going to hate on you for it if you need a minute to just chill out and relax because it's going to make you more effective when you sit back down and get to it.
Absolutely.
Wanted to kind of just touch on your business development strategy. I know with Rock, you're kind of just you're figuring it out as you go at the moment, but you have a background in sales. You've won some pretty big bids in our conversations. And tell me a little bit about what programs and procedures you guys are utilizing to grow Rock at the moment.
Yeah, so we utilize the HubSpot CRM. So basically, we use the free platform. I mean, there's lots of them out there. They're all, priced similar. And but for me, HubSpot was just what we used when we were over at Impact and Prevail,
Sure.
and so I've utilized it here. I can't say enough about CRMs. I know you had a podcast on it as well. I listened to it, and yeah, it's just, I mean, it's so critical to
Hmm.
driving new business because it just gives you that prompt, right? It's not that it's doing anything revolutionary, but it's keeping all your thoughts and process in one spot. So I think utilizing a CRM is something that I found really critical. And then the second piece is having some, whether it's a brochure, a pamphlet, a PDF, most of it's digital these days, but having a piece of material that you can consistently point the customer to be able to have the dialogue. I think those are kind of the two biggest things that I would say have driven the BD process is being able to have something that tracks the activity and then something to constantly reference during the customer journey and dialogue.
Absolutely. No, you nailed it, man. You nailed it. So the first thing that I do when I go into a company is I look, well, even before typically, like if I know I have a meeting with the company, I check out their website, see kind of what's going on. By the way, I've been to your website, Justin. It's getting started, but it's really good so far. Just wanted to give you a little thumbs up.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
I also really like the background in your videos. So just for those of you who have been chatting today and you are interested in checking out any of those working capital videos, you can find them right on Justin's website and they're incredibly well done. I just wanted to give you a little pat on the back. Those videos are well done and I appreciate them and I know lots of people will as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
We were kind of just chatting briefly about CRMs. Yeah, CRMs and marketing material are critical. I'm not going to talk to it too much on this, Justin, because I literally have like multiple podcasts on it at this point. But visual appeal, especially nowadays, is almost more critical than the content. I've said that multiple times. The content doesn't matter if people won't even open up your brochure, right?
Yeah.
So having something that like is a little bit eye catching on that front cover, I definitely like to have. Like I feel less is more. Less is more on that front cover. Have your company name, have maybe a little blurb, a one or two liner about kind of who you are, what you do type thing, but more so what they're seeing for an image, what type of picture you have on that front cover and colors is almost more important than what's in the brochure. You need them to open it.
The other thing that I would say, and again, this is kind of leaning into the new virtual world. So I'm half decent at PowerPoint, but I'm not spectacular. So I went on a platform called Upwork.com, and basically it's a freelance community. And so for $150, I had somebody probably spent 8 to 10 hours overseas and they completely revamped my PowerPoint. So it's much more aesthetically pleasing. So that's another thing that I'd say to people is, you don't necessarily have to develop it, right? You have to, what I would say is you have to have the key selling points to be able to give those people. But if you're sitting there at home and you're like, oh geez, this sounds great, but I have no idea how to use, PDF converter and Photoshop and all this jazz. In this day and age, you don't have to. You have to know what you want to communicate to your client. But honestly, for $100, $200, you can have like a top level development done so that you have something pretty fancy to put in front of the client.
Yeah, I definitely second this. I've utilized Fiverr on multiple occasions. Relatively the same thing. And you know what? I found it to be incredibly effective. I found even communicating with people, even though they're overseas, to be very easy and accommodating. And I was also incredibly happy with the final product and would definitely recommend it for any type of like graphical work or if you just need something quick and you need something revamped for you, Uplift or Fiverr, great options. Justin, just wanted to kind of chat with you, take us kind of back to the business development side. I like to kind of bring us back there a little bit. In your experience, what has been the most effective? I hammer calls, I hammer physical touch. I'm an active marketing guy. I back it up immensely. There's a place for passive marketing. I like to say it's for brand awareness. You need passive marketing on your socials and stuff so that people can start to know who ROC Advisors is, know who Capital Business Development is. But the reality, the selling, the actual growth of your business, in my mind, is in the active marketing. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. So in the last year that I was with Proveo, I did help more on the enterprise sales. And so, a couple little anecdotes that I would just kind of distill down into those tips. What I really found was keeping in constant contact with the customer. Obviously, a fine balance. You don't want to be annoying, but absolutely staying engaged with them. And probably the two biggest things that I found is every morning, and you could do it the afternoon, but I just did it in the morning. Every morning, having my hit list, sitting down and making that phone or sending that email. Again, I typically recommend phone calls though, because in this day and age, emails are so easy to just delete. They get caught in spam, and you're sitting there being like, I've sent 10 emails. Like, they probably
Yeah.
haven't seen any of them, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure.
so really making sure that you get those phone calls. But then the other thing, and my customers found this really useful, is when you do finally get in touch with them, calendarizing when you're going to touch base with them next, right?
Yes.
So if they're willing to commit to a meeting, then getting that in their calendars. And even if they aren't, putting it mentally on the radar that, hey, I'm going to call you in a week. It's going to be in the morning, and I'm going to try to get a hold of you, right? Because even if that individual is not willing to accept a meeting, now they've mentally said to themselves, okay, Justin's probably going to call me in a week. It's probably going to be in the morning. And so now when I see his phone call, I know that I'm expecting it, right? And so I would say that it's absolutely important to keep that personal connection, and that's where I had a lot of success. Is just kind of the dogged determination of, I'm going to reach out to this customer early and often, and I'm going to make sure that I calendarize so that I keep building momentum on the relationship.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. You nailed it. Like, remember, you likely are not getting this customer on the first call. You might not even get them on the eighth call, right? Like, the reality is that it can take multiple, what we call touches, which is any type of interaction with a client. It can take multiple touches to get to that meeting. And Justin, I've had some that took me 20. Like, I kid you not. I left them 20 voicemails, and then when I finally got them on the phone, they're like, "Holy crap! I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to you. I've just been so busy, but hey, I appreciate the kindness in your email, in your voicemails, and yeah, let's get together for lunch." So don't get
I kid you
discouraged.
not. So I have three different stories, all within the last 8 months, where I had reached out to a customer. I had 10 to 20 touch points. They went cold for 3 months. And I kid you not, the last one actually called me yesterday. I'm not even there anymore, and they called me, and so I funneled them back into the business, and they said, "Oh, hey, Justin, I know you were reaching out incessantly. I'm finally ready to do business." And I'm like, "Oh, well, it's actually been so long, I'm not even there anymore." So,
Yeah. Oh man, me too. Me too. I totally have those two. The best one that I have, Justin, is I was marketing with one of my previous businesses for many years. So we dropped frick thousands of brochures over that time. I kid you not, thousands. And we ended up getting this call once from a company that I'd marketed to plenty of times and just never ever got any traction. They they called me and they said, "Kelly, had your brochure on my desk for literally like 2 or 3 years at this point, but now's the time. Are you ready?" And it's like, so what I want you guys to remember with business development is you're planting seeds. Okay. You're planting seeds. I think people like to look at business development thinking like, oh, well, you hire business development and you'll be working in a month or 2 months. And maybe you will. But the reality is that there's no guarantees that it's an immediate, right? Some of these things can pay off months and years down the line. And I think Justin's given a couple examples now where it's been months or years down the line. And I have two where that's when the call comes. But you have to be planting all these seeds. You have to be marketing in order for those seeds to come to fruition at some point. So don't get
absolutely.
discouraged if it's not immediate.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and I think that was the hard thing, on our 5 year journey there with Impact that became Prevail, is really understanding that. I came into the business as an accountant, kind of left it as kind of CEO and helping out on, and COO, helping out on sales. And I think that was the biggest disconnect for me, as an accountant, you're kind of like, well, I put this number in the spreadsheet of revenue I'm going to get, and it should be okay. and,
Yeah.
and I think you start to realize it's like, probably a better way to think about that is, well, how many of these seeds and discussions have I put out into the world, right? And what's the probability that those are going to convert over a period of time, right? But I think the big thing too there, and this goes back to like keeping frequent contact, is for me, planting the seed is reaching out and making that initial contact. But I do think the watering of of that opportunity and just keeping in constant contact is just as important, if not more so.
Yes, yes. Well, you talk to it. You talk to the CRM and you talk to the follow up. So what Justin was kind of saying by scheduling that next call, why I'm always hammering the CRM for you guys, because in the CRM you can schedule the next call and it'll send you an email reminder to say, "Hey, have you called John at ABC Company today? Because today's the day," right? And having that list, that call list to work from, especially with those reminders that you get from a CRM, they truly make you infinitely more effective, and they streamline essentially what you need to do for that day with regards to your sales process, with regards to your call list and email list or whatever you got going on. So yeah, thanks for touching on that, Justin. It is. It's the repeated contact that makes you effective. It's not the first call. It may not even be when you send them your email of your brochure and everything after you've talked to them. It'll be that repeated follow-up to go for the meeting, right? Because you ultimately, all the work we're doing in business development is to get you face to face with that client, because that's where you're going to be the most effective. So we need to be consistently working to get that face to face interaction.
Absolutely.
I want to kind of lead off the show, Justin, today with just chatting about, what do you think is the most important thing you can do to increase revenues? The reason I want to ask you this is because you've actually seen the most effective things people can do to increase revenues by being on both the sales and the financial side of things. So, in your experience with all the companies you've worked with, what has been the most important thing a company can do to start to get that revenue up?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and it's really what we just discussed, Kelly, is putting in the time every day, every week. And so that's something like, as an example, I've been pretty fortunate. I've had some early success at ROC Advisors, but even with that, I'm still ensuring that at least once a day, I'm reaching out to a brand new client just to start the conversation, right? And I think that's the thing, is it's the daily discipline to keep doing that, because it's so easy to be like, oh, hey, we've got work, we don't need to do that. But before you know it, you don't have work, and the problem is you weren't putting in the time, and now have no new prospects. And like we talked about, depending on the industry you're in, it takes time to get those prospects up to speed. So 100%, the biggest thing that you got to do is put the daily discipline in. Whether it's raining or shining, you got to get up and you got to put the work in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Justin, are there any questions that I can answer for you today? I like to put myself on the line here for some of my guests. And is there anything that you would like to ask me?
Yeah, well, you've said you've really enjoyed the podcast, and I've enjoyed listening to it. I guess if and again, just like me, it's been a short while for you on the podcasting side. What has been your favorite part about podcasting?
Oh man. Okay. Okay. The best part about podcasting has definitely been the feedback. Guys, for those of you who have reached out to me on LinkedIn, you guys know I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. And for the most part, if you shoot me a message on LinkedIn right now, I have a little bit of time. If I can, I'll get back to you. And the feedback and comments that I've gotten on the podcast, Justin, of people just saying like, hey, I've started implementing the processes you spoke about. We've started to see progress in our business. And thank you so much for the efforts that you've put in to kind of put this out there. That's the most rewarding thing. There's no question. There's nothing more rewarding than realizing that this work that I'm doing is ultimately helping people. And that's what I'm here for, right? Like at the end of the day, the reality is, Justin, your services are expensive. My services are also expensive. And if there's a way that we can help people, I think we have an obligation to try to do that. And with the podcast, I'm able to do that as best as I can without physically being there to do it for them. And yeah, just to hear that the work we're doing is appreciated and that it's helping people, no question. That's the most rewarding thing about this.
Awesome. And then my last question is, I said on the podcast, I'm a big fan of like verbalizing and getting commitment, and then it kind of turns the flywheel. So if your podcast had tremendous success this year, within the year, who's one guest that you would absolutely love to have on the show?
Oh my gosh, that's a really hard question. Do you know what? I'm going to be honest with you, Justin. I'm quite happy with our local Edmonton guests. I don't necessarily need a rock star guest. And my reason being is that we talked about this. You learn most sometimes from people who are in the middle of it. And since
Absolutely.
most of the people we're marketing to are new entrepreneurs, having that new entrepreneur story is a great story to have. I'm anticipating to have some pretty great guests coming on. I have kind of a list that I'm creating with some pretty high level presidents, with some people, with some experts in the marketing side, which I think will be incredibly helpful for our listeners. But ultimately, I think we get the most value from people like you, Justin, who are, you have lots of experience in industry and you're kind of at the beginning of a new company, and you're relearning, because every time you start a new company, there's something new to learn, or there's something that worked for your last company that doesn't necessarily work in this one, and you're in the middle of it. So being able to have these conversations with new entrepreneurs, which has really been the case of all my guests so far, has been incredibly valuable, and in my mind, a better story in some cases.
Awesome. Awesome.
All right. Well, that concludes episode 12. Our guest today has been Justin LaRocque of ROC Advisors here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Justin, can you just plug your contact details for people who have found this interesting and maybe want to bring on ROC Advisors to help them with their financial situation at their business?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get us at www.rocadvisors.ca. So that's advisors.ca. rocadvisors.ca. And then we're also pretty active on LinkedIn. So we're hoping to break 300 followers here pretty soon. So you can find us again at ROC Advisors on LinkedIn. So.
All right. So for those of you who are listening, it's ROC Advisors on LinkedIn. Get over there, smash the like button. Let's get Justin some attention. I think he's got a really great product. He's an awesome person, and really, really looking forward to see what comes of this for you, Justin. And for those of you who are listening today, if you've enjoyed the show or you are currently enjoying the show, please head over to either my website or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Please drop us a review, a rating. And like I said, feel free. If you got any questions for the show or you'd like me to answer anything for you, you can always get me at podcast@capitalbd.ca. So that's podcast@capitalbd.ca. And we will see you on the flip side. Thank you for tuning in. Take care.
This has been the Business Development Podcast with Kelly Kennedy. Kelly has 15 years in sales and business development experience within the Alberta oil and gas industry and founded his own business development firm in 2020. His passion and his specialization is in customer relationship generation and business development. The show is brought to you by Capital Business Development, your business development specialists. For more, we invite you to the website at www.capitalbd.ca. See you next time on the Business Development Podcast.